take this opportunity to invite people in the name of Imam Mahdi to come and support this call and to support me in this mission that I have to propagate this faith and to join me and walk with me no matter what the cost is and no matter how long it takes until we fulfill our obligation towards God and return humanity to the Garden of Eden. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد الإمام المهدي وسلم تسليما السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. My dear sister Tiffany.
Walaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, Father.
Thank you for joining me again.
Thank you so much for having me here today.
So in the previous couple episodes, we mentioned that Imam al-Mahdi, Mohammed ibn al-Hassan al-Askari alayhi salam, he is that divinely appointed king. He is that divinely appointed guide. He is the messenger from God in this day and age, the successor of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He is the remnant of God in creation, and he is the Imam that for this time, whoever doesn't know him and have a pledge of allegiance to him will die the death of ignorance. He also is, the one who has sent forward the Mahdis, and the Mahdis are his successors, starting with Ahmed al-Hassan al-Yamani, going through the rest of the 11 Mahdis after him. And we spoke about the Mahdis and the concept of the multiplicity of the Mahdis, and how the Mahdis are the next 12 successors that come after the 12 Imams. We spoke about how also the mission which we have in this day and age, the age where all of the prophets and the messengers, the saints, the pious ones, everyone who has ever worked towards establishing that divine just state where God is king of it, that state of the believers, a state of justice and equity and equality. Everybody who has followed the Imam of their time and has lived their life working towards that goal, they have all returned in this day and age. They've reincarnated, and this is the time of the great Raja. It's a return where every day and age there's a return, so people incarnate. But this is the day and age where all of the best and all of the worst are incarnating in order that they may have this face-off. It's an extremely important time. The mission is to spread the idea that only God chooses the ruler. Nobody else has the right to do so, and that was a central fact, the most important part of all of the divine religions from the time of Adam all the way till now.
Yes.
And Imam Mahdi alayhi salam, the process of the establishment of a divine just state, it doesn't happen overnight. And you can see a parallel or an example of how a divine just state was established in the stories of many of the prophets and the messengers and the vicegerents. When we look over to Islam and we see the journey of the Prophet Muhammad in the establishment of a state, you first find that the Prophet Muhammad, first he proclaims his message and then he's preaching his message for 13 years in secret. So he's doing it behind closed doors. It's a secret dawah because they are afraid of attacks and they're still in small numbers. They're afraid of being oppressed by the idol worshippers that are living at that time.
Yeah.
Okay. And so he establishes a congregation, a community, of believers, and they all gather in private homes where they pray together, they worship together, and they have this mission of continuing to propagate the message in order that new people come into the dawah, new people come into the call, and then they have numbers and they have resources. So every person that would come into the call, they would either be an additional number to the church, and in numbers there lies great strength, right?
Yes.
Or they were not just a number, but they also brought in their money, their properties, their resources, and these riches also helped the community of believers survive and expand.
Okay. Yeah.
Eventually, they, their message is found out. There's people that believe, there's people that betray, the word gets out, and the oppression starts against them, and attacks start happening against them, and they eventually, some martyrs are killed at the hands of the idol worshippers. Yasir and Sumayya become the first martyrs of Islam, the parents of Ammar ibn Yasir, and they end up having to immigrate and make hijrah from Mecca to Medina. It is in Medina where word has already gotten out, where the supporters of the Prophet Muhammad all immigrated to. A larger community is built, and Yathrib becomes Medina. So Yathrib, they call it Medina. Medina means city. Yathrib is the original name of the city that they go to, and they call it city because it becomes the city of the Prophet. So now the Prophet has a state, and the state's called a city, okay? And it's over there where he is acting now as the religious head of the community, but he's also acting as their commander-in-chief. He's kind of like their president now, their prime minister, their king. And they recognize his authority, and nobody else dares to be the leader of the city over there, because obviously the Prophet Muhammad has contact with God, right? So the people of the city, whether they were the people that migrated to it or the people, the Ansar that were already there, they recognize that, that God is their king, and therefore they only take the word of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam as that word which will rule over them. And then the Battle of Badr takes place. The Prophet leads them, into a battle against the idol worshippers of Mecca that were seeking to attack them, and the Prophet is victorious. And the Prophet manages the affairs of the believers over there, and they share in all things. Their familial ties are cut off. The Prophet rearranges people and partners them up as family members based on their relationship in the soul world, and not based on their relationship in the physical world. Because now many of the people that have immigrated or went from Mecca to Medina, they still have relatives that are alive, but these relatives are non-believers. And the non-believing relatives, they're fighting against their believing relatives, right?
Yes.
And they want to oppress them. And so the Prophet makes clear to them that the real relationship that binds people is that of faith, and that there is something that's called brotherhood and sisterhood in faith, in God, right? Yeah. And that the believers, even the verse comes down in the Holy Quran, which says that verily the believers are brothers, right? So not only do they share in all of their money, and they share in all of their property, and people that don't have a home are hosted by people that do have a home, and people that do have money end up splitting their money with the people that immigrated over there that don't have money, not based on the fact that they were friends or had a relationship, but just based on the fact that he was another believer. So all of the resources, basically, the Prophet would split it amongst all of the people, and everybody who was a believer or had faith had a right to those resources.
Yes.
The justice was so extreme, and the concept of the oneness of the believer, that me and my brother, or me and my sister, me and another believer are one, was so extreme to the point that they upheld the rights of one another to the highest degree, to the point that those who had multiple wives and were living in polygamous situations, if a man had, for example, back in the day, this was common. A man would have either multiple wives, or he might have one wife and several handmaidens or concubines. The man who had 2 or 3 or 4 wives or concubines would divorce 2 or 3 of them, and would end up marrying them to somebody who was less fortunate, who didn't have the money to get married, or who was single. And by that, corruption in the land was stopped. Great love was born between the people out of these acts of selflessness and sacrifice.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
It is beautiful. And the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam ends up establishing, this little divine just state, which extends now. He eventually conquers Mecca, and then Mecca becomes also part of this state of his, this city of his, and this country of his. And then eventually, it comes to the point where the Prophet Muhammad, is giving his farewell speech, and the narration state that he is preaching to about 70,000 people who are now members of his country or members of his state.
Wow.
So that's the journey of the Prophet Muhammad in establishing, going from having a message to establishing a state. When we go back a little bit more to the time of Jesus Christ, we find, that the exact same thing almost is happening, with a little bit of difference, but the main journey is the same. Mm-hmm. You have Jesus Christ. He comes, he has a message. He starts gathering disciples. He's walking by. He's seeing the disciples.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. He's going up to them. He's saying, come with me, become fishers of men. I'll teach you how to be fishers of men. Like one by one, he's like handpicking people and deciding that he wants them to be his followers, and they come and follow him.
He's recruiting.
Yeah.
He's giving dawah.
Yeah.
He's teaching them.
Yeah.
They're with him based on the fact that they want to learn about it. But it's not a public affair. It's still in secret.
Yeah, very much.
Jesus is not making like this announcement in the halls or in the marketplace saying, "Hey guys, whoever wants to be a believer, I just want to announce that I'm a messenger from God." No, he's doing it in private conversations with the disciples.
Yes, very much. Even when he performed miracles, he would tell people not to tell others that they had witnessed what he had done. So yes, he was very secretive about it initially. Yeah.
That's amazing. So now, just like the Prophet Muhammad, Jesus, he comes forward and he has a dawah, and it's a secret dawah at first. It's not public. And obviously the reason is the same. Just like Muhammad feared retribution from the idol worshippers, he didn't want the believers to get hurt. So did Jesus. He didn't want that the Romans or the Jews who he knew would oppose him and his followers and his message. He didn't want also them to attack the believers. Mm-hmm. And his dawah is very short. It only lasts for like 3 years. But during those 3 years, it goes from a secret dawah and recruiting the 12, and it ends up being 72 disciples that he's sending forward ahead of him mm-hmm. when he goes to different cities. And then it goes to him eventually preaching in front of thousands of people.
Yes.
Yeah?
Mm-hmm.
But he doesn't manage to establish a state. And the reason why he doesn't manage to establish a state is because he is betrayed in a vicious way and sold out for some silver coins by the person who is in charge of the house of funds, which is Judas Iscariot.
Yes.
But the mission of the church continues, and Jesus makes it clear to his disciples that he has somebody who he wants to continue the path after him, right?
Yes.
And he appoints his successor.
Yes.
Who is it?
Simon Peter. Yes, he makes it very clear. He gives him all authority. That what he binds on earth will be bound in heaven, and what he looses on earth will be loosed in heaven. And he says that he's the rock upon which he will build his church. And the church, I would assume, is related to this community that grows out of the faith.
Yeah. So now it's something interesting because that's exactly what took place. Jesus appoints Simon Peter. He says that he's going to build this church now. Mm-hmm. Using Simon Peter.
Yes.
Church is a word that is used in the Bible to describe two things. It's describing the gathering place where the believers would gather, which initially would be these house churches.
Yeah.
All right. Which was like, they didn't have a center, that was dedicated only for the purpose of worship because it was illegal to be Christian. Right?
Yeah.
And it was dangerous.
Yeah.
And so they would still be gathering in secret in homes, but in the home there would be like a room or something where they would gather in order to worship. So church would refer to that home or that gathering place where they would, worship and gather and pray to God. But church also refers to the congregation of believers.
Yes.
The community. So the community is the church, mm-hmm. right?
Yeah.
And also the place of worship is the church.
Yes.
The congregation is the church and the home is the church.
Yeah.
So then the disciples now have to carry on the mission that Jesus had. What is the mission? To establish also a divine just state. And they have this message. And so what did they do? They want the whole world to accept the message. They want the whole world to adhere to the teachings of Christ, right?
Yeah.
And at least in the point of view of the Catholics, the goal also is that the church and the head of the church, the successor of Jesus Christ,
yes.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
That he be enabled in order that he may rule.
Yes. Yeah.
As the head of state.
Yes. As he's doing right now, the Catholics, they have sort of a state with the Pope as the head of it. So it's clear that is the goal.
Yeah. And in the past too, many of the popes were actually rulers.
Yes.
Of countries.
Yes.
Many countries that were underneath the authority of the Pope.
Yeah.
And the Pope's the one who commanded the Crusades to take place, and he led wars, right?
Yes, absolutely.
So the goal was the establishment of a divine just state. Yeah. Even the Protestant Christians, they came much later. So really, in the very beginning, there was only Catholics. Yeah. Is that not right? Yeah,
Protestantism is like a 17th century invention. So yeah, it was initially that Christianity, at least in the Western countries, was headed by the Pope. Yeah.
So now the disciples have to carry on the mission that Jesus had, and they have to propagate the faith, and their mission is the same as Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. They want to continue spreading so that new believers come into the dawah. The more that new believers come into the dawah, the more resources that they have, because each one of the members would bring in their properties, and also they would be stronger in numbers. Mm-hmm. And that's exactly what took place. In the book of Acts, we have accounts of, which describe the living arrangements and the affairs of the first disciples, after the passing of Jesus Christ and how it is that they would live. Would you care to share with our audience a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. It's mentioned a few times in the book of Acts that the believers were all of one mind and heart, and they shared in everything that they had, and nobody considered their possessions to be their own. And that people who had resources, people who had property and things, they would actually sell that, and then they would give the money to the believing community. They would put it at the feet of the apostles. So yes. It's mentioned many times that this is exactly how it worked. People who wanted to be a part of the faith, they would go all in, essentially. They would sell everything that they had, and then those resources would be what provided for the entire community.
Yeah, so now you have this idea that the disciples and the first followers of Christ believed that Jesus had said while he was alive, you know, when he made it a condition, when the rich man came to him, right?
Yeah.
And he said, I want to follow you. What does Jesus say? Jesus says, what?
He says, first go sell everything that you have and give it to the poor, and then you can come follow me.
Exactly. First, he has to sell everything that he has. He has to give it to the poor. Then he can follow Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
And then, you know, when the man finds it too difficult and refuses to, Jesus says that it is easier for a camel to pass through the eye of a needle than it is for a rich man to enter into the kingdoms of heaven. Yeah. And so this idea of being rich was incompatible with the hereafter. You cannot have eternal life, eternal salvation if you are owning possessions, owning properties, as there are people that are still in need. Yeah. As long as there are poor people, if you're rich, then you're going to hellfire. There's no way that you have faith, because a person who has faith would automatically prefer to and want to take care of the needs of other human beings and ensure that they had their daily sustenance, then have fortunes and gold and silver and other things, right?
Yeah.
And also there was this idea that they had this divine mission, obligation to propagate the faith and to support the messenger who was chosen by God in that time, and that the messenger, you know, like in the case in the book of Acts, as you mentioned, that the apostles would come and everything that they owned, the people, everything that they owned, they would place at the feet of the apostles, right? Mm-hmm. Because the apostles were managing the affairs of the believers under the direction of Simon Peter, who was the chosen successor. And so they believed that they had a mission. Their mission was to propagate the faith. Their mission was to give victory to Simon Peter, the successor of Christ. Mm-hmm. Their mission, was to take care of the poor, and all of their properties no longer believed to them as long as they believed in Jesus Christ and committed to him. So their bay'ah to Jesus came with this idea that they had to relinquish all of their possessions, all of their properties.
Yes. Exactly.
And that's exactly what they did.
Yeah.
And it says in there, furthermore, that, anybody who had properties from time to time, they would be required to sell them. Yeah. And they would sell them and they would put it into the pot. And it says actually that they would take care of the needs of any member of the congregation that had a need. So the idea became now what? That there was this community that was developing of believers, and the haves had to give everything that they had in order that the have-nots be able to have that which they need.
Yes.
And then by that way, there was justice. By that method, justice was established for all, and everybody were equal in possessions and in rights, and they could focus. There was funding now for the church, and it says that because they lived this way, God blessed them, and every day new people would be saved and would enter into their congregation and their church. And over time, their numbers increased so greatly, that they basically overtook the Roman Empire.
Yeah.
And they caused, by this method, this strategy that they had, they didn't do an armed uprising, and also, by the way, in the case of the Prophet Mohammed, he also didn't do an armed uprising. He didn't do an intifada or launch a war against against the nation that's hosting him. He didn't do any acts of terror. Now, what happened in both cases? Well, in the case of the Prophet Muhammad, they were defending themselves. And it says that those companions, they were fighting even with tree branches and things like this. And the Qurayshis were coming in with all their high advanced weapons. Same case in Christianity. In Christianity, The Roman Empire was oppressing the Christians. They were the ones that were attacking the Christians, and the Christians were never, doing any sort of armed uprisings or acts of terror against the state. They were just focused on propagating the faith. And through this method of propagation of faith in a peaceful way and the establishment of a community whereby all people lived together and they shared in all of the resources, eventually the Christian Dawah became so popular that they converted the entire state, and the Roman Empire became the Holy Roman Empire, right? And the head of the Holy Roman Empire became the successor eventually of Jesus Christ.
Yeah. It's so amazing. Like it was through the truth spreading, just through God's message spreading so rampantly that it was out of control. They couldn't fight it anymore, so they had to adopt it. It was too powerful. The truth became too powerful, and so beautiful.
It is extremely beautiful. And that was the miracle that the seven sleepers, the companions of the cave, that they were able to witness. They were living first in the time right after and Jesus Christ, where Christians were being oppressed, and they escaped from the disbelieving society, and they went to the cave, even if they didn't have any resources, and that's the beauty of the message, even if they didn't have any resources, even if they were away from the rest of the apostles and the believers, in communities of believers, which they were, they withdrew and they made their own little community, and they took refuge in the cave, and they decided that they would just stay there, and rather die there than to help the tyrant or help the oppressor, even if it was by the stroke of a pen. And God puts his hand over them, and he sustains them, and he saves them, and he protects them, and he keeps them in a deep sleep for a long period of time until they are awakened and they manage to see the state of justice that was established by the Christians, and now where Christianity and the message of Christ has spread through the empire, and they are no longer oppressed. And so they witnessed that, and then they passed away. So that is the example also of the people that returned in this day and age, that God does. That's the idea, is that God does with all of these saints and the martyrs that were martyred all throughout Christianity and through, and during the time of the Prophet Muhammad and the time of the Imams and all of those who died, and lived for the sake of establishing a divine just state. God makes them return again in this day and age, as he made the seven sleepers see the divine just state. He brings them back in this time so that they can see the divine just state. Now, when we go to Judaism, we'll just go over this real briefly. I mean, kind of the same thing happens, right? Where Moses, he appears amongst the Israelites. The Dawah starts in secret, okay, because it's under Pharaoh, so he can't talk too much. The message is spreading. He proclaims himself to be Moses in the will, he who was foretold by Joseph and the previous prophets and messengers. Their savior is here, and then he goes into an absence. The Dawah continues to spread. Aaron is in Egypt, and he's spreading the call amongst the Israelites. By the time that Moses comes back, now they're ready to support him. They migrate with him out of Egypt, just like the believers migrated with the Prophet Muhammad outside of, Mecca to Medina, and just like the apostles migrated, out of Jerusalem to Europe. Same thing happens over here, and to other parts of the world, by the way. But But then the believers, they throw all their resources at the feet of Moses and Aaron, and he manages their affairs, and he takes them out to Sinai, and he becomes the de facto head of state, and he leads them, and they share in all things, just like the disciples of Christ do, and just like the disciples and the companions of Muhammad. So, and eventually they get married, they have lots of children, they go forward, they enter into the promised land under the leadership of the successor of Moses, Joshua, just like they establish a state eventually, or convert a state after the passing of Jesus Christ.
Yes. Yeah. It's clear that the formula is the same each time. There is this gathering, this secret gathering that has to happen until there is strength in numbers. And meanwhile, there's this community that's built, this fellowship of people who are sharing in all things, and they're actually giving everything that they have to God. And then God becomes their sustenance, and God becomes their leader. And they want their lives, to be lived only through the leadership of God, and through that it just grows and grows and grows until it becomes a state of justice.
Exactly. And the same thing is with the da'wah of Imam Mahdi. Imam Mahdi alayhi salam, he comes as the successor to all of the prophets and the messengers, and his sunnah is the sunnah of the prophets and the messengers. And Imam Mahdi, his message starts with the propagation of faith, and the calling towards the supremacy of God, and the sharing of the message of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, of justice, equality, humanity first. And Imam al-Mahdi alayhi salam, he sent me and the people forward in order to do that which Moses did, Jesus did, Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa did, and that is to establish also a church, a community, a congregation, a city of the Prophet, right? Yeah. The way of Imam al-Mahdi alayhi salam is also non-violent, just like Moses was non-violent. The companions of Imam al-Mahdi alayhi salam don't seek to and don't believe in and would never seek to cause an intifada in any sort of country, or to cause chaos or commit any sort of acts of violence, but we believe in the power of the message. And for that reason, we, by his command, established a community back in the day in Egypt. Mm-hmm. And we lived in the exact same way that the other people lived in the times of Muhammad and Jesus and Moses. Yeah. We shared in all things. And we had this, we moved from one place to another in Egypt, just like the early believing communities did. And we eventually settled in one building together, where we shared all of the rooms and shared all of the apartments that were in that building, and all of the resources that were owned by the congregation at that time was shared. And God blessed us, and he put his hands over us, and we managed to propagate the faith. Yeah. Right?
Yeah. From such a small number of people, it grew and grew.
It grew and grew. In those days, we were under 20 people.
Yes. Yeah.
And in our home was our church that we gathered.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. The prayer would happen in the apartment.
And you were one of those original people that were with me.
Yeah.
I lived at the very bottom floor, and you lived at the very top floor. Right?
Yes. Yeah.
And we had incredible times.
Yeah, exactly.
And we didn't care about anything that like how fancy things were. It was very simplistic homes.
Extremely simple, yeah. But beautiful, and a time that I always look back on with so much love.
And it was in the middle of the desert. Yeah. Kind of in between Cairo and Sinai. And we made an open masjid. And what I mean by that is that it didn't have a roof to it. It was actually on top of the roof of the building. And me and the brothers would stay all night, and we would pray underneath the stars, and we would sit and speak and discuss knowledge and discuss the path of the prophets and the messengers underneath the clear skies of Egypt until the morning and the sun rose. We would break bread together and eat together and fast together. Ramadan during those times, all in that place, and all the meanwhile that we would spend our time and our efforts in discussing with, reaching out to people and bringing more members to our community. And back in those days, those 20 people, those were the surviving members that that remained. And our church was made up of people that had actually migrated to Egypt from all over the world.
Yes, yeah.
We had Brother Uner over there. He came from Germany, originally Turkish. We had Joe. He came from the United States. We still have Joe and Uner. We have Ali Riza, who came from Germany with Iranian background. We had Hamid Riza, who came from the UK. We had Taimur, an Egyptian. We had Mustafa, was Egyptian. We had many Egyptians at that time. We had, Sister Alia, who came from Pakistan. And then we had Rauda Zahra Maryam Nurhan, Hadil, Sabah and Iman Tahani.
Yeah, from UK.
It was an extremely beautiful time.
Yeah.
And I'm not even mentioning all of them. There was, there was others. There was Mahmoud and others, but I was just wanted to give people an idea. And before that, there was many other people also that flew out to Egypt. They came from Malaysia and from all around the world, and they spent time with us, and then they ended up going back to their respective countries as well. Some of them eventually left the dawah. Other people, they left, and they actually propagated the faith even further in Europe and in other countries. And then we eventually met up with them again.
Yeah.
And so then we ended up moving from there, and we came to Europe, and we had several places where we, where our community went to and met with even more people. We went to Germany. Yeah. We went to Sweden, and now we came to the United Kingdom. And during those time periods in Germany and in Sweden, we had, our community grew from around 20 individuals to a community of over 200 individuals.
Yeah.
With thousands upon thousands of faithful believers that live all across the globe. We have believers now in this call of Imam Mahdi that are in America, in Mexico, and in almost all of the countries of South America. We have believers on the opposite side of the world that come from Malaysia, Indonesia, Thailand, even Russia and China.
Yeah, and wow, it's amazing to think about it, like the growth from this small group to this worldwide call is just, it's incredible.
It is incredible.
And I see that this is actually just the beginning. And the way that you've described it really just mirrors those stories from the time of Prophet Muhammad and the time of Jesus and the time of Moses, where the people, particularly the time of Jesus, where the disciples, they started as a small group, and then they started to branch out and spread the message throughout the entire world.
Exactly. So basically, we're gathered in this day and age. Our mission that we have from Imam Mahdi alayhi salam is the same as the mission of the previous prophets and messengers. Our mission is to establish a community, and to establish a congregation, and to propagate the message of the supremacy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala across the earth. And the method whereby we are doing that is by pooling in our resources together and establishing a congregation, a community, rather many communities, but this is the main one, with the only representative of Imam Mahdi alayhi salam on the planet that is speaking to the people in the flesh, who's claimed the will of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, who comes to the people using the letter of appointment as a proof of his valid claim. The only person who is also, and this is the only dawah that is proclaiming that only God can appoint the leader or the ruler, and who's raised the flag of the supremacy of God, and who has demonstrated divine knowledge, and so has come with the fulfillment of the law of knowing the proof of God. Now, we believe that the narrations were clear, that people have an obligation to the Qaim of the family of Muhammad and to Imam al-Mahdi in that time. And the narrations state that in the time of the Qaim will make impermissible upon the people their own money. So private money becomes impermissible. And the reason why that is because it became impermissible upon the early disciples of Christ too, and their disciples, the early communities, whether in Islam or Christianity or Judaism, that members of the faith be part of the faith, be part of the church, and still have their own private properties. If they were a member of the community, if they were a member of that faith, they had to give up those possessions which they had and put it to work at the feet of the apostles for the sake of the propagation of the faith. And we see that there's this story in the Bible of somebody who actually received the curse of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala upon them and a grave punishment because they did not follow this rule.
Yes.
Would you like to share?
Yeah, sure. There's a story in the book of Acts about this couple. They were part of the believing community. And as it was stated, the believers, they used to sell any properties or anything that they had in order to give that money to the community. And it was Ananias and Sapphira. They sold a piece of property and they gave money. And they gave money to the disciples, but it was not all. They pretended that they gave all of the money from the sale of their property, but they actually withheld some for themselves, and they thought that they were deceiving Simon Peter. But Simon Peter actually, he knew, he was inspired by the Holy Spirit that he knew. And when he confronted them, they actually just dropped dead on the spot because they had withheld the sustenance from the believers, basically. So it's a very harsh warning about how serious it is. If you pledge your allegiance and you say that you're going to be a part of the believing community and you're going to sustain the believing community, you're going to give it all to God, basically. You can't try and withhold some for yourself. It doesn't work that way. You can't have both.
Exactly. So obviously the killing of these two individuals by God and the story being preserved in the Gospels serves as a warning, but also an indication that God expects, rather he demands, from all members of the faith until the hour of the establishment of a divine just state. He expects them to come together and to share in their properties and in their resources. And like Ahmed al-Hassan, he said, the divine just state will never be established, on the ground until it is established amongst you, O believers. So first and foremost, it has to be established in the hearts of the followers, of the disciples, of the apostles. They have to feel compassion for one another and want to treat one another and actually do treat one another the way that they would expect justice to be implemented in the divine just state, where all of the resources of the state be used to fulfill the needs of all people. That must happen first in the community, in the congregation, And everybody is obliged to, and the narrations of Muhammad and the family of Muhammad are extremely clear that when the Qaim appears, people have a divine obligation to go to him, even if they have to crawl on ice, and to support them with him and the faith with everything that they have.
Yeah. And that they're truly loving one another as themselves. And yeah, it's the establishment of what God wants. Yeah. Exactly.
And so I take this opportunity to invite people in the name of Imam Mahdi, alayhi salam, Mohammed ibn Hassan al-Askari, to come and support this call and to support me in this mission that I have to propagate this faith, and to join me and walk with me no matter what the cost is and no matter how long it takes, until we fulfill our obligation towards God and return humanity to the Garden of Eden.
We're going to be there.
God bless you, Tiffany, and thank you for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me, and thank you for everything that you taught me today.
Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum salam.